Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamunatiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavala Bhagiri Vāra-ratho Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamunatiravanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we'll take a look at Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 29, Text 20. Yathā vāta-ratho ghrāṇam āvṛṅkte gandha āśayāt evaṁ yoga-rataṁ ceta ātmānam avikāri yathā vāta-ratho ghrāṇam āvṛṅkte gandha āśayāt evaṁ yoga-rataṁ ceta ātmānam avikāri yathā vāta-ratho ghrāṇam āvṛṅkte gandha āśayāt evaṁ yoga-rataṁ ceta ātmānam avikāri. Others, please. Any Vaishnavis? Word to word. Yathā, as. Sorry. My iPad is old, so like me, it's kind of slow and creaky. Vāta, of air. Rathaḥ, the chariot. Ghrāṇam, sense of smell. āvṛṅkte, catches. Gandha, aroma. āśayāt, from the source. Evam, similarly. yoga-rataṁ, engaged in devotional service. Ceta, consciousness. ātmānam, the Supreme Soul. Avikāri, unchanging. Yet, which? Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Whoops. As the chariot of air carries an aroma from its source and immediately catches the sense of smell, similarly, one who constantly engages in devotional service in Kṛṣṇa consciousness can catch the Supreme Soul, who is equally present everywhere. Responsively, please. As the chariot of air carries an aroma from its source and immediately catches the sense of smell, similarly, one who constantly engages in devotional service in Kṛṣṇa consciousness can catch the Supreme Soul, who is equally present everywhere. Srila Prabhupada's purport. As a breeze carrying a pleasant fragrance from a garden of flowers at once captures the organ of smell, so one's consciousness, saturated with devotion, can at once capture the transcendental existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who in His Paramātmā feature is present everywhere, even in the heart of every living being. It is stated in Bhagavad-gītā that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is kṣetra, present within this body, but He's also simultaneously present in every other body. Since the individual soul is present only in a particular body, he is altered when another individual soul does not cooperate with him. The Supersoul, however, is equally present everywhere. Individual souls may disagree, but the Supersoul, being equally present in every body, is called unchanging, or avikāri. The individual soul, when fully saturated with Kṛṣṇa consciousness, can understand the presence of the Supersoul. It is confirmed in Bhagavad-gītā that, bhaktyā mam abhijānāti, a person saturated with devotional service in full Kṛṣṇa consciousness can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, either as Supersoul or as the Supreme Person. Om ajñānatimirandhasya jnānanjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukhaṁ karoti vācālam pangum langhayate girim yat kripatamahang bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachadine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Yathā vāta-ratho ghrāṇam āvṛṅkte gandha āśayāt evaṁ yoga-rataṁ ceta ātmānam avikāri. As the chariot of air carries an aroma from its source and immediately catches the sense of smell, similarly, one who constantly engages in devotional service in Kṛṣṇa consciousness can catch the Supreme Soul who's equally present everywhere. This seems to me to be more or less a kind of a transition, bit of a segue here. Kapila Deva is about to give his mother some very intense instruction. And that's connected with the consequence of what's suggested here. So Srila Prabhupada points out in his purport that an expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Paramātmā, is present everywhere. Even in the core of every living entity. And we see in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā how Kṛṣṇa makes a distinction between kind of maybe a lowercase kṣetra and an uppercase kṣetra. That each of us is capable of being aware of our own body, our particular field of activity as it's put in that chapter. And I very carefully qualified that by saying that we're capable of knowing. Because generally, especially it seems nowadays, where the world is so saturated with distraction, the ether is saturated with distraction, that it seems it becomes more difficult for anyone to even understand what's going on in their own body and in their own heart especially. I remember back in 1970 in Back to Godhead there was an article that was written by Achyutananda. And the article was essentially an account of a conversation he had had with Srila Prabhupada's godbrother and friend B.R. Sridhar Maharaj. And Sridhar Maharaj was talking about the title of the article was The Descent of the Holy Name. And I was actually quite thunderstruck by it because one thing that it made clear was that this wasn't just Srila Prabhupada's thing, it really was a whole culture of Krishna bhakti. And Sridhar Maharaj was speaking the same thing in somewhat different language that we hear from Srila Prabhupada. And so he talked about the importance of sound, how sound sound can actually affect change. It can affect change in a particular living being, in a human being, in an animal, in a plant. Sometimes, if we've been on the interwebs, we'll see pictures of the elephants There's this guy, I guess he's at an elephant compound or something, and he's playing, I can't remember what he's playing on the piano. Is it Clair de Lune? I don't know how I would forget that. My mother played Clair de Lune at least once every day. We had a lot of moonlight in our house. My mom would play Clair de Lune, Debussy's Clair de Lune, and I would play the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And you see the effect that it has on these elephants. It's quite amazing. And of course, there are all kinds of videos out there on about animals and music. And we, what is it? The music soothes the savage breast, or something like that. Music is a very, very powerful thing. I remember another one time, maybe 15 years or so ago, I was staying at an ashram, and somehow or other I found myself down one of those YouTube rabbit holes, and I came across this video that said 10,000 people singing Ode to Joy. This is the choral fourth movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is quite an amazing piece of music. And that Ode to Joy it can be very, very moving, especially have some sense of the lyrics. But just the music itself and the voices, the power of the voices. And this was 10,000 people. This is something they do in one city in Japan. Can't remember which one now. Every Christmas. Apparently the Japanese love Beethoven. And so it was 10,000, there was a symphony orchestra, you had the four soloists, and then there were 10,000 people in this stadium, all singing this together. And I was listening to it through some very good headphones, and it literally blew my mind. I started crying, I started jumping around in my yurt and yelling. I was just so blown away. And it created a disturbance. Other devotees came running to my yurt to see if I was okay. And I had these tears coming down my cheeks, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm okay. Sorry, just my heart just exploded, that's all." So sound is very powerful, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj makes this point that, and this is, he's thinking back earlier in the 20th century, how one of the first things an army wants to do when they're conquering another country is capture the means of communication, the radio and television stations and the newspapers, so they can broadcast sound, kind of taking, to take over that country. So here we have smell that's used as kind of our analogy, and what this is pointing out is actually the powerful nature of bhakti. So, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there when I started thinking about the music. So we may be somewhat aware of our body and our mind and our emotions, but generally we're just so distracted by all those YouTube videos, apparently, that we don't really pay attention sometimes. I bought a watch, one of whose features is that every hour it's supposed to remind me to get up and move, because I do a lot of sitting. But unfortunately, I have bad enough hearing and loud enough tinnitus going on so that I don't even hear the watch reminding me, oh, it's time to get up. And fortunately, it's got it buzzes a little bit. And sometimes that'll get my attention. If I'm actually writing, sometimes I might not notice. When things are going well, you kind of get into a flow state. So sometimes we have to be trained to pay attention to our bodies, and especially to pay attention to our emotions. So we have the capability of understanding that. But I'm generally not so aware of Bhrigu or Janardhan's or Shamrar, what's going on in their bodies, much less what's going on in their hearts, in their emotional lives. Now, sometimes when we get close to people, this is possible. There was a book I read called Secret Teachings of Plants. And in the first part of the book, the author explains the power of the heart's electromagnetic field. It's dozens of times more powerful than the brain's electromagnetic field. And sometimes when people spend a lot of time close together, their heart's electromagnetic fields can become entrained with each other. And so this is one way we kind of become sort of in tune with each other if we know each other very well. We get close to each other, physically or emotionally. And sometimes we can pick up on what someone's feeling, even if there may not be necessarily externally perceptible symptom. So that's possible. And this explains sometimes the sense of the heart pangs that we get when we're separated from someone that we care about a lot. There's something actually missing. So we're not generally so in tune with that. And we think of ourselves as separate entities. You know, I had one friend write me a few years ago, let me live my life and you can live yours, or something like that. But there's also a sense in which there's a very strong sense of oneness. We are all consciousness. We are all, in essence, identical. And we're all living in this world together. And so Srila Prabhupada says that when there's, when one individual soul doesn't cooperate with another, that soul becomes affected. Prabhupada uses the word altered. The Sanskrit word is vikar. It creates a vikar, a change. So if someone is rude to me, somebody cuts me off in traffic, or snakes my parking spot, or gives me stink eye or something like that, that will affect me. But if there's cooperation, if there's harmony, well, if there's cooperation, that creates harmony. So Bhrigupati has his service, I have my service, Shamurari has his service, Duchakarma has his, Archita has his. But if we're all working for the same thing, that's harmony. That's a symphony. I was speaking yesterday about this series of publications from Touchstone, called A Symphony of Commentaries. And it's different voices with somewhat different perspectives on these verses in Srimad Bhagavatam, and they create this wonderful harmony. And if there's disharmony, then we have dissonance. We have a sound that's jarring sometimes. Sometimes that works in music. Speaking of Beethoven, in his last symphonies, especially in his last quartets, not symphonies, in his last quartets, and there's one especially called the Grosse Fuge. Even now, more than 200 years later, people have not figured out what was going on with Beethoven when he composed that piece, because there's a lot of dissonance in there, and people often don't like to listen to it. So if we're not in harmony, if we're not in tune with each other, then there's this dissonance, this disharmony. I sometimes use the example that Srila Prabhupada gave at the University of Hawaii in 1972. He gave a talk at the Kennedy Theater at the University of Hawaii when he was there in May. And he talked about, I felt he was illustrating an Ishavasya society, a God-centered society, which I'll get to in a moment. And so he used the example of a pond, and you drop it, so you've got this very tranquil surface on the pond. If you drop a stone, it's going to disturb the surface of the pond. But if you drop one stone, the pattern, what happens on the surface is this pattern of concentric circles radiating from that point where the stone struck the surface. So if I drop a stone in the surface of that pond, it creates this nice kind of meditative pattern on the surface of the pond. If Bhrigu were to drop a stone somewhere else, create a nice pattern, he would be happy until that pattern runs into mine. And then there's some disharmony. And if Shyam and Dhruta and Archita, and then the rest of us, and even the people living on the interwebs, listening on the interwebs, were to drop stones, we'd have chaos on the surface of that pond. But Srila Prabhupada said, if we pick one point, we can drop as many stones as we like on that one point. And we have this continuous, harmonious pattern. So the point that Kapila Dev is preparing to make here is that somehow or other we need to understand every living entity's relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That same Supersoul that dwells in our heart is also dwelling in the heart of every living entity. And that every living entity experiences happiness and distress in the same way that we do. Chanakya Pandit says, Matrivat paradareshu, paradravyani loshtavat, atmavat sarvabhuteshu, yapashyati sapanditaha. A wise person has this perspective. Matrivat paradareshu. Any woman other than my wife, not mine to enjoy. Matrivat, like mother. Mother's untouchable. No, mother's worshipable, right? In every culture, we revere our mothers. When that doesn't happen, we have something that happens like in, was it Sophocles' play, Oedipus Rex, where he accidentally ends up killing his father and marrying his mother. And when he realizes that's what happened, he gouged his eyes out and put himself into exile for the rest of his life. So, matrivat paradareshu, paradravyani loshtavat. Other people's property, not mine. Instead, it's just like garbage in the street. And I would guess that no one in this room or in the interwebs room, when they walk down the street, they see some garbage, on the curb or in the gutter or something, and think, I got to have that. That's mine. So if we see others' possessions as garbage in the street, not for me to enjoy. However, atmavat sarvabhuteshu, their suffering and enjoyment is just like my suffering and enjoyment. Then we're going to behave differently with people. Yapashyati sapandita. That's a wise person's perspective. And so that's what we're going to see over the next few verses in this chapter. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary on one of these verses, says that over these 6 verses, Kapila Dev makes this point angrily and lovingly. So he's going to make a very forceful point that we need to have this kind of harmonious relationship with others. And it's possible by Kṛṣṇa consciousness. So I want to, okay, the clock is still ticking. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. There's a passage in Srila Prabhupada's purport to the Bhagavatam's 2nd verse that I probably shared this here before, and I'll probably share it again, because this was actually life-changing. Even after reading Bhagavad-gītā and being impressed by Bhagavad-gītā, that bhakti yoga was what I wanted to do. I wanted to make that part of my life. It wasn't just something I was curious about anymore. When I read this couple of sentences in Srila Prabhupada's purport to the second chapter, to the second verse of the Bhagavatam, which is the Vastu Nirdesha Shloka. Vastu Nirdesha Shloka, Kṛṣṇa Das Kaviraj explains in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's kind of like a thesis statement that what do you call the invocation? I'm losing the Sanskrit word now. The auspicious, invoking auspiciousness. Mangalacharana. That the Mangalacharana of a text has three parts. One is namaskar, offering obeisances to the deity of that text. The second part is the Vastu Nirdesha, the statement of the point that text is going to make. And then you have the āśayāt, or blessing. So the second verse of the Bhagavatam is its Vastu Nirdesha Shloka, the statement of the thing that we're about. But it also includes, in the first pada, the first half line, it includes a good look at who is most likely to appreciate this text, Srimad Bhagavatam. So that first pada is, as we know, is dharma prodchita kaitavatra paramo nirmatsaranam satam. So this is for people who have already completed what Kṛṣṇa said at the end of Bhagavad-gītā, sarva dharman parityaja. Parityaja, completely reject all conventional senses of dharma. And so here it picks up, the Bhagavatam picks up with the next step. Having done that, for people who've already done that, who are therefore, they're satam, they're pure at heart. And how is it that we say they're pure at heart? They're nirmatsaranam. They don't have any envy of others. And how is it that they don't have any envy of others? Because they don't have a personal agenda. Dharma prodchita kaitavatra paramon. They've already rejected not just other senses of religion or dharma, but here the Bhagavatam speaks very strongly. Cheating religion, kaitava dharma. In other words, they don't have a personal agenda. And Kṛṣṇa Das Kaviraj explains that phrase, kaitava dharma, in the 22nd chapter of Madhya Lila in Chaitanya Charitamrita. When this verse comes up, he says, what do we mean when we say kaitava dharma? Why kaitava dharma? What are we talking about? Dharma, artha, kama, moksha, vancha. What? Those are the four great goals of human life. The purusharthas, the great values of human life. Virtue, dharma, artha, making progress in the world. Kama, the pleasure that comes when you make progress. I remember this, I probably shared this before, but I remember when I was teaching at San Diego State, in San Diego there's the on-campus bookstores, and there's also an off-campus bookstore where you can generally get somewhat better prices on your textbooks. And believe me, you need that nowadays. This was one of the hardest parts of my teaching in college was having to deal with the students' reactions to the prices of the books. And I taught English. Math books, science books, those babies are really expensive. So I went to this off-campus bookstore right next to San Diego State University called KB Books. And I was checking on the book order for the upcoming semester. And on the wall in that bookstore, they had this big poster. And the picture in the poster was this great big house, and below this great big house was a garage with, I think, 6 bays. So there were 6 cars. And each of these cars cost more than the house that we bought a few years later on the Big Island cost each. And the caption on the poster was, "Justification for Higher Education." I was an English teacher. I was always, if I were inclined to be, I would have been embarrassed by many of, comparing my car to many of my students' cars. So this was a little shocking to me. So the comfort that we get, the pleasure that we get from making advancement in the material world, making progress in the material world, and then moksha. And why is that called cheating religion? Because it's all about me. It's about my virtue. It's about my progress, my pleasure. And when I've seen through the whole scam, my freedom. So in his purport, Srila Prabhupada is making the point that the Bhagavatam's for a particular kind of person. He says, in the material world, there's keen competition between animal and animal, man and man, community and community, nation and nation. But the devotees of the Lord rise above such competitions. They do not compete with the materialist because they're on the path back to Godhead, where life is eternal and blissful. Such transcendentalists are non-envious and pure in heart. In the material world, everyone is envious of everyone else, and therefore there is competition. And this sentence changed my life in a moment. But the transcendental devotees of the Lord are not only free from material envy, but are well-wishers to everyone, and they strive to establish a competitionless society with God at the center. So I read this maybe end of 1969, beginning of 1970. And when I read that sentence, I said, this is the revolution that we've all been looking for. I came of age in the early 60s, early mid-60s, and mid-60s. And we were all about revolution. And that was when I saw, I don't want to just practice this. Sign me up. I'm signing up for that revolution. So the point that Kapila Dev is making here, is that we can have that vision only by bhakti. Srila Prabhupada cites that verse from the end of the 18th chapter, bhaktyā mam abhijānāti. It's only by bhakti we can actually perceive the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Only bhakti has that power. There's a text, there's a verse in a text called Matara Shruti. Jiva Goswami cites it in his Priti Sandarbha. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur cites part of it in one of his Bhagavad-gītā commentaries. Vrindavan Das Thakur cites it in Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat. And the text goes, Bhaktir evaṁ nayati, bhaktir evaṁ darshayati, bhakti vāsa purushaha, bhaktir eva bhūyasi. Only bhakti has the power to bring us near to Kṛṣṇa. Only bhakti has the power to show us Kṛṣṇa face to face. Only bhakti has the power to control Kṛṣṇa. Therefore, bhakti is the most powerful thing there is. Bhakti has the power to control the Supreme Controller. Sri Kṛṣṇa Karshini, this is one of the symptoms of pure devotional service, that it attracts even the all-attractive Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, if we have this sense of bhakti, then naturally we will catch the Supreme Personality of Godhead in our hearts. And the consequence of that, as we'll see over the next few verses, is that we will treat everyone as they are, as someone who actually has the Supreme Personality of Godhead living in our hearts as well, as we do. So only in that kind of consciousness is that ātmāvat sarva bhūteshu, that actually identifying with each other's experience possible. And that's the real basis of genuine loving kindness. That's the lesson, one of the lessons of Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's what I saw in this verse. Time's up. I'll stop now for some discussion. If anyone has some comments or anything. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much for your attention. It's always a little nerve-wracking for me to speak here, but it's a great honor and treat as well. And I hope I'll have an opportunity to Who's tomorrow? Who speaks tomorrow? Because now we're starting the good. Tomorrow's verse is really cool. Who? Okay, everyone's convinced, huh? So who's tomorrow? Do we know? Pardon? Oh, go to Chandra. Okay, it's got a very cool verse. Thank you. Grantha Raja Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Go to